All right, well, welcome to the virtual plant propagation experience. So what we have here are the materials that we're going to be using. So we have this 10 by 10 tray, and in here we have 10 of these Jiffy pots, and Jiffy pots are made out of lots of times coconut coir, and basically they come and they look like a little pill, and when you add water they puff up and soak up like this. So we've got 10 of those, and then we have 3 of these 3-inch pots. And then, 3-inch pots, and then we have a 4-inch pot that we're going to do cuttings in. Other things we need for the lab today, we're going to use some labels, and I've already filled those out. So we're going to use a goldfish plant, Swedish ivy, English ivy. We're also going to do some leaf cutting, so I've just generally labeled those. Lots of people will remember what the plants are and not really need to. You can use scissors for this activity. Some people just like to use their fingernails. Probably the best way to do it is to use a razor blade, but I usually don't hand out 130 razor blades in my class, so we're not going to do that. And then here we have just a thin garbage bag basically, and we're going to use it to keep the humidity on, and then we'll use this tag with the student name and the date on it to be able to tell whose is whose. All right, so first we're going to introduce the plants that we're going to be working with today. So this one right here is a peperomia. It's called Emerald Ripple. And you'll notice it kind of has these wrinkly succulent leaves. It works really well for leaf cuttings. And then next here we have African violets. And African violets, again, thick succulent leaves with kind of thick succulent petioles. And we're going to use those petioles as we do our leaf cuttings today. So that's our next friend. Right here we have a Christmas cactus or Thanksgiving cactus. Maybe it's easier just to call it a holiday cactus. And this one really kind of doesn't have leaves, it just kind of has these stem sections. And when we take cuttings here, we're just going to take some of those stem sections. They're actually kind of a leaf cutting. And then the last plant we have here is jade. This is a pretty good sized jade plant. And jade has these really thick succulent leaves. And when we take these, we'll just kind of pop one off like this. And you'll see it really doesn't have a whole lot of a petiole, but when we put it in, we're just going to put it down into the media about halfway so that the top half is sticking out and the bottom half is in the media. Okay, so those are the plants we're going to use for leaf cuttings. Then if we turn around here, we have the plants we're going to use for stem cutting. So right here we have Plectranthus or Swedish ivy, sometimes people call it creeping Charlie. And so we have a nice big plant of it here. We'll have plenty of cuttings to take. Swedish ivy does get little white flowers on it, and if you were doing some propagation with this, these ones are gone, but you'd want to pinch those flowers out so that the plant focuses its energy on making new roots. Okay, so there is Swedish ivy. This is called goldfish plant, and you can see it gets these little orange flowers that look like kind of like a goldfish. So we're going to take some stem cuttings from it. And right here we have English ivy. So this is another one that's a pretty common houseplant, and you can see we'll take some cuttings from it. And the last one we're going to do is a coleus, and there's lots of different types of coleus. One way to be able to help recognize a coleus is that they have square stems. So if you look, the stems are square because it's in the mint family, and lots of different variations in leaves. So those are the plants that we're going to work with. They should all work pretty easily so that we can do this experiment pretty well. So we're going to work on the lab in kind of 3 different sections today. So the first section, we're going to use these Jiffy pots, and what we're going to do is make a comparison between a stem tip cutting and a stem section cutting. And if we look over here at the Swedish ivy, the difference between a stem tip cutting and a stem section cutting is the stem tip cutting has the new growing point on it. So if we cut this off right here, we want to have at least 2 nodes where the leaves come out, so I'm going to cut it right here. We cut that there, that's a tip cutting because it has the tip of the growing point in it. Okay, so we'll keep that here. And then if we go back to the next section of the plant, we want to have at least 2 nodes. This is called a section cutting because it does not have the growing point on either end. One thing we want to do with these cuttings is we want to try to remember which end was out towards the tip. So this end was the end towards the tip, so we were going to put this end down. So grab my tip cutting here, and we're going to do this for all 4 of these stem cutting species. what we're going to do is make a comparison between a tip cutting and a section cutting to see which one roots faster, okay? So what we want to do is we're going to put these in 2 adjacent jiffy pots, but we don't want any of these leaves that might get down into the soil on there because they'll just rot. So we're going to just take those off like this, and then we'll just take it and carefully push it down into the jiffy pot like that so we make good contact. Same thing with our section cutting. We're going to go here and going to cut those leaves off that would cause us some problems, and we'll put that down in the media. Now you'll notice the leaves don't go exactly the right way, and that's okay. We aren't worried about that. So what we're going to do for each plant is we're going to have a tip cutting and a section cutting. All right, so now we're going to move on to our goldfish plant. So this one has lots of nice shoots that we can work with. But again, we're looking for the tip cutting where the growing point is, and we want to have at least 2 nodes. Pretty easy to do on goldfish plant. So come back here. There is our tip cutting. And you'll notice there's 1 blossom in here. And we don't want the plant to focus on blooming right now, so we're going to actually cut that off. Okay, so here's our tip cutting. And then right back behind it, we're going to go back and make sure we get at least 2 nodes. And we'll make our section cutting for the goldfish plant. Okay, so tip, section cutting, tip, section. And again, we're going to take off all those leaves that would be under the soil because they'll just end up rotting. So tip cutting for the goldfish plant into the jiffy pot. These ones have a little stiffer stem, a little bit easier to get in there, but we got far enough in easily with the coleus. So we'll take off those bottom leaves again. And then we're going to do the same thing with our other 2 plants. So same thing with our English ivy. So you can see here's the growing point, so that's a tip cutting. So we'll take a cutting here. And then we'll go back right behind that and take another cutting for our section cutting. Again, trying to remember which end was towards the tip. So we want to keep them like this. So our tip cutting, section cutting. And then we'll go ahead and remove the bottom leaf here, and then the bottom 2 leaves on this one. Okay. And then we'll come over here to our jiffy pots and we'll just push them down in again like we did with the others. Okay, so there's our tip cutting, and there's our section cutting. Okay. So now the last one we have is coleus, and the coleus is pretty easy to do as well. So here is the growing point, so there's the tip cutting, and we'll come back here and make sure we have a couple nodes. The nodes are really close together on these ones, so easy to do. So there's our tip cutting, and then we'll come back here and get our section cutting. And again, we're going to want to remove all those leaves that are down here at the bottom so they don't cause a problem. Sometimes they're easy enough to just kind of rub off like this, so we'll try that. Okay, so there is our section cutting for coleus. This leaf got damaged. And then here's our tip cutting. And again, we need to remove some of these bottom leaves, so I'm just going to pull them off on this one. It's a little bit easier, especially these little guys down here. Okay, so here's our coleus tip cutting, coleus stem section cutting. You can see the cut at the top. Okay, so we'll go and put these in. Now, one thing you'll notice with the coleus is their leaves are so big that sometimes they can cause a problem. So what we'll do is we can actually cut off parts of the leaf to kind of make it fit in the space better. So you can go ahead and do that. Okay, so you'll notice that we had 10 of these jiffy pots. We only used 8 for our comparison between tip cuttings and stem section cuttings. So the other 2 we're going to put some leaf cuttings in. So for that we're going to use the peperomia and we're going to use the African violet. And for both of those, because they have nice long petioles, we're going to use those to help us. And these are leaf cuttings, but the petiole helps us get good contact with the media and gives extra storage. So this petiole is a little bit too long. It'll be too hard to get it to go down into the jiffy pot, so we're going to cut it so it's only about 1 inch long. And then we're just going to take that, and we'll take the petiole, and push it down into that Jiffy pot until we get really good contact with the leaf base against the Jiffy pot as well. Just want to make sure we get good soil to leaf contact. So there's our peperomia. And we're basically going to do the same thing with African violet. I'm going to pick a nice big leaf in here. Again, that petiole is going to be a little bit too long, so we're going to cut that off. And you notice how thick the petiole is and juicy, so it has a lot of stored water and nutrients in there. So we'll do the same thing with this one in the Jiffy pot. We're going to push it down in until the base of the leaves makes really good contact with the media like this. All right, so that's all the Jiffy pots. We'll talk about how we're going to compare these in a little bit. Okay, so in this next section, we're going to work with these 3-inch square pots, and we're going to work with English ivy and goldfish plant and Swedish ivy again. And what we're going to do this time is do a comparison between the three and see which species roots the fastest. So in order to do that, we want to compare more than just one cutting. So what we're going to do is we're going to come to each of the plants and we're going to take 3 tip cuttings. So we want to try to make them about the same size. So here's a nice tip cutting of Swedish ivy. So we've got one there. And then let's find, here's another good tip cutting here. So we've got 2. And then you'll notice there's lots of tips on this plant because it's been pruned recently. So we've got our 3 tip cuttings here. So what we're going to do is we're going to bring them over and we're going to prepare them just like we did in the last section. We're going to make sure we cut off these bottom leaves that might cause us a problem. So we've got one cutting there, and second cutting here, and then our last cutting right here. So we have 3 tip cuttings here. And so what we're going to do is we're going to take these and we're just going to push them down into this moistened potting mix. It's just a mix of peat moss and perlite. And so we'll push them down in and get good contact gently as we can and just kind of evenly space them in the container so that they have some room. And we'll just push those down in. And then the last one. Right. So the last thing we're going to do with this one is we're just going to put a tag in it that says Swedish ivy, and in this case it's going to serve 2 purposes. One, it's going to show us which plant is which. The other is it's going to help us keep that plastic bag that we're using for humidity up off the plants as much as we can. So let's tuck that in there. Oh. All right, so now we're going to do the same thing with our goldfish plant here. So we're going to take 3 tip cuttings. So got a good one here. There's lots of tips on this plant too, so it's pretty easy to do. So another one. And then our last one right here. Okay, so we've got 3 tip cuttings to work with, and whenever there's a flower in there, we're going to take that out. So we'll come in here and clip out that flower. Don't see any on these other ones. Okay, and then again, we want to remove these lower leaves, which sometimes they're easier just to pop off. So here's our first cutting. Poke that here down into the soil, and then we'll keep going until we have our 3 cuttings. And then again, the last thing we're going to do is put our label in for goldfish plant. Okay, so there's that. Okay, last plant we're going to do is this English ivy, and over here we've already taken a cutting, so this is a section cutting. So we want to go and find tips so that we can do all the same. So here's a tip, so we'll take this one, and then here, you notice the tips are lighter green usually. So take another one here, and then this looks like a good one right here. Okay, so here's our 3 tip cuttings here, and again we're going to get rid of some of those lower leaves that would get below the soil and rot. And so we'll do 1, 2 cuttings, and then the last one right here. Okay, so I'm just getting rid of all those leaves, and then we'll put that here in the media. So again, last thing we're going to do is tag it. So now we're done with this part. What we're hoping to compare here is which one of these three species roots the most quickly. And that's what. All right, so for the last part, we're going to do several leaf cuttings all in this bigger container. So for this one, we're going to repeat using peperomia. Instead of using the African violet, we're going to use a burrowtail or donkey tail plant right here. Okay, it's a succulent. And then we're going to use the holiday cactus and the jade plant. So what we're going to do is we're going to do 4 leaf cuttings of each one, and we're going to put them in rows in this container. So we'll just come in to the peperomia and just cut off 4 leaves. Oops, that one was a flower. I don't want the flower. Okay, so I've got my 4 peperomia leaves, petioles attached, and I'm just going to come in and I'm going to make a row of those and push them right down onto the soil surface so that you get good contact with the leaf and the soil. Okay. That one's a bit long, I just don't want to go in there. Okay. And the last one here. These are going to be tight in here, but that's okay. They don't need a lot of space for this part of their growth. So you can see 1, 2, 3, 4. Okay, the next one we're going to do is the burrowtail. And with burrowtail, you could do sections of the stem, but we're going to do leaf cuttings. And so for the leaf cuttings, all you need are 4 of these little succulent leaves. Okay, so I've got 5 here. The most important thing is you want to make sure you put the cut end down. Okay, so we'll go ahead and we'll put them in here. And these ones you're kind of put in until you can't really see them. So you can see, just barely see the tip of it. Okay, just to make sure you get good contact. Okay, and I'm just going to do all 5 of these just to be sure. Okay. Last one. Okay. So then when we move on to the holiday cactus, what we're going to do is take a section for each cutting. So here's one section for a cutting. Then we'll take the next one behind it, and then we'll move over here and we'll take 2 more sections here. And notice I'm keeping them upright so that I know which end is up and down. So what we'll do for those is we'll just poke them in about halfway with the correct end being upward, and we'll just make a row of those here. Okay, so 1, 2, 3, 4. All right, and the last one is the jade plant. So I already took 1 leaf off the jade plant before, and I'm just going to take 3 more leaves off, so just kind of twist and pop them off. So we need 4 of those. Okay, so now we have our 4 leaves, and again we want to put the part we broke off down. And so we'll just put our 4 leaves in here like this. They can be pretty close to each other without too much problem. All right, so now we have our row of 4 peperomia leaves, well, we actually have 5 burrowtail leaves, 5 holiday cactus leaves, and 5 jade leaves. So last thing we're going to do here, we're just put 1 tag in that says leaf cuttings, and this one is more just to help us keep that bag up off of the leaves. Hopefully we can remember what the species are. All right, so we've done everything. So we've got our 10 Jiffy pots here with our section and tip cuttings, and then our 2 leaf cuttings. And then we have our 3 pots with the 3 tip cuttings of each of the 3 different species, and then we have our leaf cuttings. So now what we're going to do is we're going to take a garbage bag, basically, just a small garbage bag, and we're going to cover this whole thing up. And the reason we're going to do that is we're going to try to keep the humidity high around these cuttings. They don't have any roots, and they can dry out pretty quickly if we don't try to do something. So a lot of times commercial propagators will do like a misting system or something like that. Sometimes you don't really need to do anything, but for this little home experiment kind of situation, what you can really do is just use a plastic bag like this. It could be a Ziploc, anything that's big enough. Actually, this one isn't big enough. But what we usually do at the end is we'll take it and tie it up with the tag that has your name and the date on it. And then what you'll do is you'll come in and you'll make your observations for what the cuttings are doing. So what that's going to look like is you're going to come in each time and you're going to gently tug on each of the cuttings. And right now you can see this one just kind of moves. There's no resistance. When you start feeling resistance, that's when it starts having roots. You want to be careful not to pull too hard. If you pull too hard and you yank, you can kind of hear a pop, and that's the roots breaking, and that's not what we want. So we'll do that for all of our cuttings for a few weeks and see how quickly they root. So let me just uncover this and give you an idea of what we're trying to do. So for these 3 pots, what we're trying to determine is which species roots the fastest. So is it the Swedish ivy, the goldfish plant, or the English ivy? For these, we're trying to figure out if the tip cuttings or the stem section cuttings root the fastest, and then also compare that to how fast these leaf cuttings root. And then for leaf cuttings, we're checking for rooting, so we're still going to do that tug check to see if they're rooting. But what we also are wanting to eventually observe is a new plant growing.